Goth fashion is one of the most misunderstood and underrepresented styles in fashion, in my opinion. When goth fashion is mentioned, the general population thinks black studs, leather, but it's so much more than that. Actually, some goths don't even wear black. I need a red light. I'm Tay, I'm a fashion designer and artist. Welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to break down some of the goth fashion subcultures, and at the end, I'll do a wee design challenge and create a look of my own, so stick around for that. If you're new here, subscribe. If you're returning, hello again. The UK has given us many things. Penicillin, the telephone, Madeline Argy, Dish Up Dinner With Me, TikToks, which I'm obsessed with, by the way, Abby, Brittany, both the Chloes. Yous have a permanent invite round to mine's for dinner, with the only exception being that you lot are gonna cook. But also, the UK gave us the birth of goth fashion. In the 1970s, band Bauhaus released a single called Bela Lugosi's Dead, and while truly, really 100% knowing when and where something like goth fashion really began, this single release is widely considered to be the birth of goth. Then, in 1982, Soho, London, the Batcave nightclub opened its doors, and this became a space where goths would gather to listen to music and enjoy the company of like-minded goths. Similar to the goth fashion's predecessor, punk, goth fashion has always served as a visual representation of the rejection of conventional beauty standards, anti-establishment, anti-consumerism, and anti-fascism. Goths were, and of course are, a safe space for people that are, or were, more rejected by society at the time, including LGBTQ+ communities. The main difference between the punk fashion movement and goths is that the goth community isn't typically as loud with their political manifesto. Goth fashion lent more into embracing death and decay, embracing the darker emotions and rejecting society's fear of aging or being imperfect, donning Victorian and mourning type attire. While both punks and goths at this time, and still to this day, are spaces where the outcasts and different would collect to feel a part of something. When it comes to the fashion, you can see some really strong differences visually. Interestingly, goth fashion has been, in my opinion, one of the, if not the, strongest styles in all the fashion style options to exist because it survived and has not and will not leave like most trends. This, in my opinion, is due to the constant adding and changing and evolving that goth fashion does. Like fashion trends we see come and go and then come back again, those are mainly based on capitalism and mainstream media. Goth fashion, however, was never interested in what was popular. Actually, literally the opposite. With that, the entire idea behind goth fashion is individualism. So while most might think all black everything for goths, some just didn't feel that that represented them. So goth subcultures will forever continue to be created because people are people. Goth fashion has evolved and become a complex spiderweb of subcultures and niches and styles. No longer is goth just a black Victorian outfit, thick eyeliner, fishnets. Now we see goths that exclusively wear neons or exclusively wear pastels. Let's look at some of the goth subcultures in fashion that we see today, and there are so many, but out of respect for your time, I want to focus on some of the main ones, as well as a couple maybe you've never heard of. As I say, goth fashion culture is forever moving and molding and changing. So as you and I are speaking right in this moment, 5 more goth fashion subcultures could have been born. But today, let's look at Gothabilly, Pastel Goth, Whimsy Goth, Steampunk Goth, Punk Goth, or DEATHROCK, Military Goth, and Soft Goth. I literally have a list of so many of these that can be covered, but I'm not sure a 5-hour video is on the books for today, so if one was missed that you're really interested in or would like to see talked about here, comment and maybe I'll do a part 2. '50s fashion is one of the strongest and most recognizable eras in fashion history. Hyper-feminine silhouettes, perfectly placed hairstyles and prints and patterns, and bold statement color palettes. It's one of the best, in my opinion, but take that style and shred up the commercialized, smiley-faced housewife vibe and inject horror and punk energy, you have Gothabilly. Easily one of the coolest goth fashion subcultures we'll look at today. But before fashion, as this typically does go, was music. In the late 70s, band The Cramps hatched the term Gothabilly to describe their music, which combined punk and rockabilly. Fashion, being an art form, often takes inspiration from music genres, and after Gothabilly music was born, Gothabilly fashion came onto the scene and has never so much as considered leaving it. The fashion takes the vintage silhouettes and hairstyles but adds black, horror, death, and macabre into the mix to create an unmistakable goth fashion subculture that is immensely popular amongst the alt community. Fashion isn't just inspired by music. As technology evolved and we gained access to more corners of the earth visually, right from home, communities were born on the internet that inspired fashion styles and, of course, goth fashion subcultures. Pastel goth challenged the idea that goths must wear all black, be moody, and never be caught dead or alive in pastel. In the 2010s, teens wanted to be part of the goth community, having a love for the dark and the occult, but didn't want to be tied down to the traditional goth styles. And as I've said before, goth fashion was born around the premise of rejecting what you're being fed and told is the way. The idea, with the addition of online culture from websites like Tumblr and Lookbook, pastel goth created a unique juxtaposition in fashion that grabbed goth elements like metal spikes, occult symbols, and black fishnets and smashed it together with Japanese fashion influence, specifically kawaii and gorokawa fashion, creating a pastel and black creepy cute combination that exploded in popularity amongst many. A new place was born for alt community members to be goth, but reject the traditional versions and represent themselves more in their own way. The Craft, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Charmed. What do all these shows have in common? If you said that they basically raised me and are partially to blame for the way that I am today, you'd be correct. But, actually, all of these classics are a strong representation of the whimsigoth fashion subculture. The 70s saw the birth of bohemian hippie fashion. The 90s grabbed that and made it magical, after the 80s spent time in fashion rejecting the corporate, sleek, Wolf of Wall Street clean-cut looks. Whimsigoth is barefoot in the woods, casting spells, and dancing around a fire. The 90s came with a massive Wicca resurgence, and as I've said, and you'll hear me say every day until time ends, fashion is what's going on. Fashion is inspired by society, media, music, politics, all of that. So, take a boho resurgence, Wicca influence, and the chemical X to all goth fashion subcultures, rejection of mainstream society, you have whimsigoth. Use of texture and flowing silhouette, think like Stevie Nicks and Kate Bush, with a slightly moody influence as well, like the vibes that Mazzy Star and the Cranberry songs give. And add celestial vibes, lots of layers, jewel-toned color palettes, and a bit of poetic grunge, if you will. And you only get points if you thrift everything. Goth fashion is so interesting because while inside of the goth fashion subcultures conversation, new strains are born and split off on their own to escape things that other goth fashion areas were created around. So while pastel goth lent into the digital age and was inspired by internet culture, steampunk goth, or steam goth it's sometimes called, said literally get away from me with the tech and let me just escape and go back in time and stay there. Steampunk created a world where the Victorian age never ended, and Steam Goth modified that slightly to be more sinister and darker. Steam Goth has all the elements of steampunk, including vintage craftsmanship and old mechanical elements like clocks and copper pipes, but it changed it to include a sort of mad scientist element. Steam Goths, it's speculated, were not interested in the popular cybergoth style that was around at this time in clubs. Cybergoth is bright and electric and really big on the rave scene. Steam Goth stepped back from that, turned around and booked it in the other direction, breaking away from the hyper-modernized alternative style that was becoming a bit mainstream in the 90s and 2000s. And this is what I mean about how goth fashion culture is so interesting, because you have the main umbrella of goth fashion, which is already niche, right? Then beneath that, veins split off, and you have all of these other categories, and within those categories, you see goths uninterested in certain color palettes or lifestyles or inspirations, and go a completely different way because they feel that that's becoming too mainstream. But that's the one thing that they all have in common. It's that want and that need to not be mainstream, to reject the majority of society. And I often wonder, sort of chicken and egg, what came first? Goths rejecting them, or them rejecting goths? communities. You could assume that it's the latter because a lot of these communities feel slighted by the majority of society, like oppressed groups, people that feel marginalized. So you would think, well, society rejects them, so then you have goth groups. But at the same time, the majority of society, if there's something that's mainstream or normalized that's just not good, goths are rejecting that anyways. So it is very much chicken and egg. Either way, without being too philosophical about it, goth fashion subcultures are fascinating and complex and never-ending. The 80s was and forever will be known for its fashion. And its music, but its fashion. And its movies, but its fashion. Big hair, bright colors, tight fits, clashing patterns, and energetic wildness that left a permanent mark on the fashion scene. Of course, not all liked that and refused to conform with the hyper-neon happiness and mainstream workout vibes of the time. And punk fashion, having exploded in the mid to late 70s, served as a staunch nemesis to the bright 80s fashion. Burning the neon spandex, punk continued strong and opted for torn plaid, black leather jackets, heavy makeup, and grungy, anti-establishment moods. But something interesting happened. 70s punk fashion became too mainstream for some in the 80s. Some punks felt that the punk fashion scene became too masculine, too mainstream, and lost its creative and artistic freedoms. So, enter punk goth, or DEATHROCK, a middle finger to the popular at the time, pristine and polished bright fashion. DEATHROCK also split away from more traditional punk fashion and turned more inward with their songs and art. While more traditional punk, saying traditional and punk in the same sentence feels really weird, but you get me. While more traditional punk sang about politics and government corruption, DEATHROCK embodied religious hypocrisy, death, and mental alienation. Visually, it can be a bit difficult to discern DEATHROCK versus punk, but there are subtle differences, and those differences are really important. Both don black leather jackets and fishnets, but DEATHROCK takes a little bit more of a theatrical approach, including stage-like makeup. White base foundation, thick black eyeliner and eyebrows, black lips, and the iconic Death Hawk, which is possibly the most recognizable element of the DEATHROCK goth fashion subculture. Yes, punks spike out their hair as well, but the Death Hawk, notably, is not as sleek as the punk mohawk typically is, and it takes more backcombing and texture and just chaos. Additionally, you'll usually see the punk mohawk with clean-shaven sides of the head, but the Death Hawk keeps what you call death flaps or side tendrils, which are just wee bits of hair that keep a more theatrical and messy look. DEATHROCK was an important shift in the goth and alt fashion community because it's a strong example of how even within niche communities, people want to push back on what they are expected to do. People don't want to be seen a certain way and permanently pigeonholed into things because of outside perception. This, again, to me, is what makes goth fashion so intriguing and honestly so important. We can look back at different times and literally see what was going on in music, politics, and the emotional temperature amongst certain groups of people, namely marginalized and oppressed groups, by looking at what the goths were doing. Another way that goth fashion communicates with us is by representing what the pulse was on things like economy. Now, military goth is an interesting one because it combines the typical goth fashion rejection of mainstream and the punk anti-establishment fuck the man representation, but also wraps in two more important layers. One being economy, two being irony. In the late 70s and 80s, alt music bands were touring and playing shows, which meant oftentimes they were broke. Through necessity at first, they would shop at army surplus stores, which obviously have a slew of jackets, coats, cargo pants, and boots that were affordable, kept them warm, and were good quality. Much like a lot of things that we see in fashion, and when talking about fashion throughout the decades, is while this started as a choice out of need, it became an intentional fashion decision for style. In addition to that, just like how punk goths will use religious imagery, but like inverted, military goths take their garments and flip them upside down too, proverbially that is. They poke at the rigid and oppressive military by replacing the nationalist flags with more goth-leaning occult imagery, metal studs and chains, and of course, black. It's like they were sort of cornered into buying and wearing garments that were meant to show support for the army and by proxy like the government and that. but they said, you know what, we might have to wear this, but not your way. And if that isn't one of the best representations of goth fashion, I don't know what is. I don't want to lead with calling this goth fashion subculture underwhelming, because I want to be as charitable as I can here. When the soft goth look came into the fashion scene, there were mixed thoughts and feelings, and there was an overwhelming general consensus of, you're not welcome here. And that's not because you're different, that's because you bullied me in high school. Soft goth was born around the 2010s, sort of in the Tumblr era, and was born alongside soft grunge. They're sisters, basically. Soft goth puts comfort above anything else, and gives the ability to be alternative, but takes away the high maintenance nature of trad goth or death rock. It's more casual, minimalist, and caters to those that need everyday utility, putting silhouettes and textures more at the forefront versus prints and patterns. Just like all other goth fashion subcultures, makeup plays a really important part, with soft goth being more of a contoured look, avoiding blush, no color really at all, and sort of a smudged, tired eye. The whole subculture is subtle, with looking effortless being the key to it. But here's why it's a bit controversial, like-ish. Kind of controversial. As we've talked about, the main thing that all of the goth fashion subcultures have in common is pushing back and away from mainstream and doing your own thing. Most subcultures are heavily influenced by alternative music, and this is important. When shows like Wednesday became popular, they inevitably influenced mainstream fashion and trends. So, when that show was released and became popular, we saw a goth influence, soft goth really, come back again into mainstream fashion. Soft goth, while technically it existed back in the 2010s, became popular again in the 2020s, and a lot of the long-standing goth community rejected the trend, of course, and called the trend out for being exactly that. Trendy. Trendy is the antithesis to goth fashion, as we know. In addition to that, with goth fashion leaning heavily on alt music as influence, it's not lost on the goths that the soft goth trend sidesteps the barrier of goth fashion being a music-based subculture by claiming that this is gatekeeping, and that goth fashion should be allowed for everyone, regardless of their music tastes. I would argue that yes, sure, I guess you could be goth without being into alt music, but the music itself isn't necessarily the entire point. It is the politics, however. Goth is a space where all are accepted. However, the number one thing that all subcultures reject is conformity, fascism, bigotry, and hatred. And seemingly, the alternative music infrastructure makes their stance on things like this very clear. And certain political climates, today being one of those climates, it's actually imperative to know what those around you believe about certain things. So in short, goth used to be a very clear indication that that person is safe to be around if I'm gay or trans or lefty or whatever. But the soft goth introduction and popularization, it blurs those lines a bit. Does that make sense? Now, I think there are plenty of versions of soft goth that I really like, and I hope this entire section isn't sounding like me just shitting on the soft goth style community, because I'm not. And if anything, with my lifestyle, it actually might be the category that I fit into most when it comes to what I wear. But if we have learned anything from this video so far, goth fashion is not just things that you put on your body. Goth fashion is not something you just walk into a shop and buy. It's a highly customized and detail-oriented choice that represents so much more than just clothing. And I do think that while it's not people who wear the stuff that makes it this way, soft goth kind of strips that origin from the goth fashion. Soft goth is more accessible, but with having been a trend, we see fast fashion shops now mass producing goth fashion in troves. And that's the complete opposite of what goth fashion is about. However, that being said, while fast fashion is bad, and I can do a whole video on that, believe me, it does mean that alt baddies can get access to clothing that they feel represent them at an affordable cost. And while it's terrible for the environment and it's cheap, and sometimes it steals designs away from smaller designers, not everyone has the ability to be able to afford to dress the way that they want. Thrifting and DIYing are a massive part of the goth fashion scene, but again, not everyone is able for that. So me personally, I'm not going to sail you down the river if you get a goth outfit from like Amazon here and there, if that's what you have to do, but there are ways to do it better, and maybe I can do a whole video on this as well some other time. TLDR, soft goth, complicated, a bit controversial, but not all that bad in my opinion. Just very different from all the other subcultures we've talked about here. Okay, let's get out of history mode and get into fun design mode. I want to do a design challenge, but obviously within the confines of what we have looked over in this video. Normally, when I do a design with me thing, it's either for an event or for a person. Like my last couple of videos, I designed for the Met Gala and I designed for Tara Yummy, for example. And this won't be the only time I do it this way, but for this channel, this is officially the first time I am doing a design challenge this way. I'm gonna sort of do a blind pick design challenge where I blindly pick the goth subculture, a garment category, and a random element that must be included and design an entire look based on those picks. So, first up, I'm gonna use an online random generator, put all the goth subcultures in here, and let it pick one for me. So let's see what we got. Punk goth, DEATHROCK. Okay, great. Now let's do garment category. This will basically be what the event or place is that this look will be worn. Let's see what we got. Oh, bridal. Oh, I'm actually so excited. Okay, so excited. Lastly, let's throw a bit of a curveball in here. So these are going to be random elements that must be included in the final piece somewhere. Print or pattern. Okay, so a punk goth bridal look that includes a print or a pattern. And you know where I have to go for some mood boarding images for the ideation step, right? Pinterest. Let's go to Pinterest and get some images for the mood board. I'm just going to do a very quick mood board for this one because we've been basically given the exact guidelines, the exact request, I suppose, for the design challenge. I'm going to throw in a few of the keywords and start collecting imagery. If this is your first time watching one of my videos from my channel here, this is basically the step where I just grab as much visuals as I possibly can, and later on we're going to arrange them onto a mood board so I can build the piece off of the mood board. If you've watched some of my videos before, you're very familiar with this step. You know how much I love this step. We just collect and collect and collect, and then I take it over to a blank canvas here, throw them all up onto it, do some arranging, some resizing, rearranging, some moving around, and mood board. Here's the mood board that I'm going to use to get inspiration from to design a piece based off of our challenge. Now it's time to get some sketching done. I'll begin with some preliminary sketches, just initial inspiration for what I think I want to see for silhouettes and details. I'll throw in some croquis, and yes, there is 3 croquis here, but I'm gonna try and keep it to just one final look. And surprise! I didn't stick to just one. I did do 3 final looks, and in 3 different colorways, mind you. The first design is a sheath silhouette gown, double lace-up slits all the way up both legs in the front, a structured corset bodice in a cobweb print fabric, and off-the-shoulder fishnet sleeves. The insert in the back for the train is a sheer material, and the main material for the skirt would be a glitter fabric. I like the idea of having the insides red, so it's like a little pop of blood, like when she's walking. Look 2 is a mermaid silhouette, also with slits up both the legs in the front, but instead of corset details, it's safety pins. A cold shoulder long sleeve in a fishnet material, and the whole dress grabs that stripe print element from the mood board. Piece 3 is another mermaid silhouette, plaid print, sheer chiffon at the bottom of the gown, lace up back with a high neck torn fishnet neckline. And that is all 3 pieces I did for our design challenge. DEATHROCK inspired bridal gown. What do you think? Which one's your favorite? I really enjoyed putting this video together. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. There are so many more subcultures that could be covered, but as you can see, this video is longer than my usual ones are. So if you want a part 2, comment below and I'll maybe get to it. If you enjoyed hanging out with me and doing some designing and chatting about some fashion history, like the video and don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!